Welcome to episode 209 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent Elaine Smith, who served in the FBI for 22 years. Elaine, who grew up in the Chicago area, spent her career assigned to the Chicago division. In this episode, she reviews her efforts to convince Ken Tokyo Joe Edo, the highest-ranking Asian American mob associate, to cooperate against the Chicago mob, who was also known as the Outfit. In an attempt to secure his cooperation, Elaine Smith successfully investigated Joe for interstate gambling violations. He refused to cooperate and turned her down, that is, until his mob associates attempted to kill him by shooting him in the head 3 times. After the botched hit, what developed was a 17-year cooperation relationship between Elaine and Joe. The historical evidence he provided led to arrest, convictions, and long sentences for many of Chicago's top mobsters. Later in her career, Elaine became an expert in money laundering and white-collar crime and was named the first female supervisor in the history of the Chicago FBI office, and the second female supervisor promoted in the field. The Federal Reserve Bank named her Leader of the Year in 2000, and in September of 2001, Elaine was placed in charge of reconstructing the financial backgrounds of the 19 terrorists of the 9/11 bombing of the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the downing of Flight 91 in Pennsylvania. After she retired from the FBI, Elaine Smith continued to conduct examinations for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and assist financial institutions in designing their transaction detection systems. Later, she began working with attorneys whose clients had been accused of financial fraud. In federal court, she is considered a certified expert witness on financial investigations. Elaine Smith is the author of A Gun in My Gucci, which covers her journey from school teacher to special agent and reveals her special relationship with Ken Tokyo Joe Edo. You can learn more about Elaine Smith by visiting her website, aguninmygucci.com. I found this to be a very, very fascinating interview, not only about Tokyo Joe, but also about Elaine's journey. Elaine joined the FBI about 4 years before I did, and we have very similar stories about our initial reception into the Bureau. But before we get to the interview, I just want to let you know that I am recording this introduction from the lovely Marriott Residence Inn in Raleigh, North Carolina. Yes, I made the move. I closed on the sale of my home in New Jersey on July 31st. We're moving into my brand new home in downtown Raleigh tomorrow, so wish me luck. I have not been able to get out my August reader team email. This move has not gone smoothly by any means. I will be getting that August reader team email out probably sometime next week. I don't have any ads on this podcast, and I don't plan to. And I don't have a Patreon account, but you can still support the show by joining my reader team and picking up copies of my books, available as ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks. Of course, I want to welcome new listeners and invite you to join my reader team. This podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my monthly email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, which is a colorful list of more than 50 books about the FBI written by the FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoir. You can join my reader team on my website or use the link in your podcast app's description of this episode. I want to thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, Elaine Smith. Hi, Elaine.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. I can't wait to do this case review because I've had a chance to read your book, A Gun in My Gucci, which is a great title. And I also watched the documentary that you were the moderator for. And it's called Tokyo Joe, The Extraordinary Life of Ken Edo and the Chicago Outfit. So first of all, if you could, before you even start talking about your relationship with Ken Edo, who I know you call Joe, could you give us just a little bit of information about the Chicago mob, which I understand is called the Outfit?
Yes, in Chicago it's called the Outfit. Different from New York when they call it the Families, or it's called the Outfit. And well established by Tony Accardo during probation. And that was how they got their foothold in nightclubs and really moving liquor all around Chicago and Midwest, and kept their stranglehold on a lot of bars and restaurants and prostitution and strip clubs. But I was introduced to it when I became an FBI agent. Growing up in Chicago, not really dreaming of being an FBI agent, but once I did become one, there was no other area that I wanted to work but in organized crime, because I thought that was such an integral part of what Chicago was. And so when I graduated from Quantico and was transferred to Chicago, I had in my mind that I really wanted to work organized crime, even though I was placed on an applicant squad to do applicant background investigations, and then moved to a bank fraud squad, which I thought was really boring. I really just wanted to work organized crime, and decided that the way that I was going to be able to be like the second woman to work organized crime in Chicago ever was to take the supervisor of that squad, the one that I thought would be the softest touch, out to breakfast, which was a proposal that he found shocking, but couldn't resist taking. So I took him out to breakfast, and over breakfast I told him the purpose of our meeting, that I really wanted to work on his squad and organized crime. And would he take a look at my resume and consider me? What he did was go back, as I found out, went back to the squad and had the agents vote whether they would accept a female agent on their squad, which, of course, was really not the way things should be run, but that's the way at that time they were. And I didn't know about it, and that was just fine. And one of the real underlying reasons was they just needed another body to sit and monitor the wiretaps they had going on the different mob individuals. One thinks that sitting on a wiretap might be exciting, and it's a really great investigative technique, but it is deadly boring. And the wire rooms at the FBI at that time were populated by hundreds of pornography magazines, because they had just done some pornography raids on these porno houses and strip clubs and smut book places, and had thrown all of this paraphernalia, to include sex paraphernalia, into the wire room. So that's where I sat for hours at a time.
Was it there for the reading pleasure of the people monitoring the wire room?
Yes, you got it. They weren't expecting women to be going back there and spending 8 to 10 hours, just staring at the blank walls and these reel-to-reel things recording these conversations, but left us like hundreds of magazines. So I went through them. Of course, I had to look at everything. Then also listened to a lot of really smutty calls, but also some incredibly incriminating phone calls where they would say, don't talk on the telephone. And then 5 minutes later, they'd talk about picking up, the juice money or meeting this person or that person. It was totally proved the criminal enterprise on anyone's imagination because none of them had the discipline to keep the conversation short and non-businesslike.
Let me ask you a question because you've grown up in Chicago. You think you have an idea of what working organized crime would be like. Once you were able to get on that squad, was the reality of what you thought organized crime in Chicago entailed, was that true? Or were you terribly disappointed?
No, I never thought of them as really having any wonderful redeeming qualities, but I found out how unredemptionable they were, what stupid people, some of them completely illiterate, and how they were absolutely abusive to women, are totally disrespectful they to any racial differences. They were narrow-minded, ignorant men. And I found
Not how they were glamorously portrayed on
totally
movies and
not
TV
glamorous.
shows.
Had absolutely zero taste in anything. Food, clothing, furniture. I don't even know if many of them were barely literate. And so they were just a step above a street thug if they hadn't all started out as street thugs, actually. And they made not much money. I later found out that if you're a made member of the mob, you really don't make big money. Who makes big money are the big bosses, the Tony Accardos of the world, the Joey Ayupas of the world. They're the ones that make big money. But just the regular soldiers and the street bosses are not making a lot. What they live on is extortion. And that means extorting your butcher. Hey, you're going to give me a discount. I don't want to pay full price for these steaks. They extorted everybody that they dealt with. And they thought their soldiers should bring them all sorts of presents. If somebody committed a robbery, they wanted their cut of the robbery. So it was a hard scrabble life, hard scrabble. So I learned that there was nothing glamorous, that it was hard scrabble. They were really ill-educated and discriminatory to everyone that wasn't an Italian and wasn't a male. There were very few. No, there were none that I can recall thinking that they were admirable in any way.
Well, I can't wait to hear how they treated you if they had such a disregard for women. And now here you come, as an FBI agent, thinking that you're going to investigate them. As a matter of fact, I think Philadelphia, I don't know how many women were on that squad either. You came in about 4 years before I did. But I think the thought was, why have a woman on the squad? Because the organized crime people and the associates of organized crime were not going to cooperate with a female agent. What do you think about that?
Laughable. I thought it was laughable, as it turned out to be, that they were not at all intimidated by me, slightly, but not really. And so I found that I could show up at their door, at their work, or even call them and ask them if they would meet me for a drink at some bar. And they would show up and they would meet me because they were not intimidated by me. And I think to myself, really, aren't you pretty stupid? But I'm not going to push this at all. In fact, I'm going to work this to my advantage. Many meetings, I would meet these guys and have just a casual drink and never ask them a question. And then they soon would start talking to me because they actually kind of realized while I was there really what was my purpose. And they didn't mind sharing. And so I went back to the office. I actually went back to my car and immediately jotted down everything they had said to me and wrote it up because a lot of what you know about the mob is that you learn it from informants, or you have to learn the culture. You have to just kind of get to know them. And that was a little background that I provided when I was just getting to know these people. And the fact that it wasn't like a pissing match between myself and the mobsters that I met.
And it sounds like because they were macho men, they wanted to tell you how great they were and all the wonderful things that they did to impress you.
Yes, and not that they bragged about, they didn't truly brag to me, but they didn't mind chatting with me, and they didn't mind talking about world news, and they didn't mind observations on the restaurant or the bar that we were at, or cars, or anything like that. It was just, chit chat. And every once in a while, I'd throw in somebody's name, and they would either punt it away or make a couple comments. But it wasn't until they became comfortable with me, which took a couple meetings, 3 meetings or something, that I'd start to ask them really softball questions about areas that we're interested in, people that we were interested in, like the trucking business. I remember talking to a couple guys about trucking, and one guy owned a trucking corporation. And then as I got to know him, he started telling me about trucking and the mob, and the fix was in the state police. And so I worked him for a while, and I wrote up his information, and I thought that I should give him a payment. And so I waited till Christmas time, and I slipped him an envelope with money in it and a Christmas card. And I told him to please buy something for his wife, Dottie. And that was how I got around justifying and making it more worthwhile their time to come meet me rather than chat with me. I never thought that after a while, just knowing who I was, and that they were not going to get anything more than chat from me, that they probably would lose interest in talking to me.
A little motivation.
Yes.
Well,
Buy something for your wife.
Well, your book, A Gun in My Gucci, is really focused on a time in your career where you were investigating and then kind of working with Ken Ito. And so I think, if we can concentrate on that, but if you could set the scene and let us know at this time who's the head of the mob and some of the things that were going on in the city of Chicago that you thought that Ken Ito could help you with. I'm going to sit back and be quiet now and, just learn from you about this relationship that you had with Ken Ito, which ended up lasting for 17 years with Ken, who I understand you called Joe.
Yes, everybody called him Joe. His name was Kenneth Joseph Ito, and his nickname was Joe. So the outfit boys would call him Tokyo Joe, which he chose not to find offensive. But, he started hanging out with them shortly after World War II. So there was America was very different. Not that the mobsters have changed that much, but America was very different. And so why Joe became tied up with the Chicago mob was after he was released from the internment camp in Idaho. He developed as a professional gambler. He ran away from home at a very early age, and he learned to support himself by gambling. And why did he do that? Was that he found out that he had almost a photographic memory. He was incredibly facile with numbers and would remember them. And so if you can remember numbers and you can remember cards, you can become quite a wonderful gambler. And that's what he became, and he became quite successful. When he left the internment camps, he moved to Chicago, and he started going to these poker games and participating in any kind of card games, and was making a name for himself and doing very well. And the outfit ran these games, and they saw, we got to get this. This guy's kind of a card shark, but we can't quite figure out who he is. But we kind of want to make sure that we can start to get him into our group. Now, the guys that were guarding these card games were the guys that eventually came the bosses of the Chicago mob, like Baraki and Felice and Joe Lombardo and a few others. They became the bosses of the street. But at the time Ito arrived in Chicago, he was a gambler, a very successful gambler, and they were impressed with him. And so then they started asking him for a cut. Now, if you're going to come to these games that are run by the outfit, if they see that you're a steady player and you're also a steady winner, then they're going to put the arm on you and they're going to ask you, since we're sponsoring this game, and if you want to be allowed in, then you have to give us some of your cut, some of your win. So that's how they first got into him. And then Joe continued running gambling games himself with their permission. And eventually, by the time I became an agent and investigated him, he was running what was called bolita. Bolita is based on, it's basically wagers that are placed by Puerto Ricans. They're based on the 3-number lottery that comes out of Puerto Rico on Tuesday night, or I think the drawings after Wednesday at 12 a.m. And it was like every mom and pop store, everybody like on the corner were taking bolita wagers for a couple dollars, maybe $100 if it was ridiculous. And then the runner would come and pick up all of these different bets and these wagers, and they all had to be in before midnight on Tuesday. And as soon as the Puerto Rican number was drawn in Puerto Rico at midnight Eastern Standard Time, they would know who the winner was, and then people would start coming to collect on what number they bet. Number 365 was a very well-known number that hit a lot and people bet a lot. I don't know why. I don't know if there's any kind of thing that anybody's done that as to how many times a number like 365 comes up in just a random roll of the dice or whatever. But there were hundreds and thousands, maybe 100,000 bets that were laid on the Puerto Rican lottery each week. And Edo controlled that.
So he was the numbers guy.
He was a numbers guy. He had gone into policy with the blacks on the south side of Chicago. And then the Peace Stone Nation and the black sort of extremists, or not really, but it came in to control it. And he said they were very undisciplined. They really made a mess of the policy game. And so he got out of that. It was totally uncontrollable and nothing that he could really share. But the Puerto Ricans were another story. And then he was making his name and his money through bolita, and so was the mob. But many people really didn't know. They all thought he was a mob associate, but they didn't know that he was getting a cut from the bolita rackets every single week. So as a new agent, I get assigned the Ken Edo case. I looked at the case jacket, and it had been opened in 1959. Opened and closed and opened and closed. And it was opened again when I was transferred to the squad, and that was the case I got.
And that was what, 1979? 78? Yeah.
78, 79.
That is what we used to call an old dog case.
Right. That is even more than an old dog case. That was to me like a slap in the face. We're going to give you, not even anybody that's Italian, now that you're on the organized crime Italian mob squad, we're going to give you not even an Italian guy, we're going to give you some Japanese guy, and we're going to give you somebody who has been so-called under investigation since 1957.
So basically, the truth is, they're giving you a case that nobody else wants.
Of course. Yes. Nobody else wants that.
I know how the story ends, so I know... I know in the end they all have to, well, I won't say that.
They learn, never underestimate anybody.
Yes, exactly. So, but I'm sure when you first got that case, you were disappointed. I mean, this is it? This is what you're going to give me?
Yes, that's exactly what that exact tone of voice. And what is this? And how fair is this? Of course, I never said that. But I just decided that I was going to start studying this guy and did all the usual things that new agents do. You know, I ordered up phone records. I did property searches. I did places that he had lived, women that I was with. A lot of them I was able to trace because he would get phone numbers in the woman's name. So that gave me a big clue as to who was living with them. But it changed that quite frequently. So then I started looking at the cars he had owned and the license plates he had, and his police record, which was like 2 arrests, and they were like for loitering or something, and then one was gambling. They were very minor. I never really had any convictions except early on in Idaho. when he must have pissed off some sheriff or somewhere. But
So what was the case being open for? What were you looking at
it was a
him
mob
for?
associate of the North Side mob. That was still the rumor. And it's still, informants were still yapping about it. Although they couldn't really put their finger on exactly what he was bringing into the mob. He was just an associate. Until I got really lucky and some guy, and I'll call him Frankie, called in and wanted to talk to somebody who was giving the investigation about Ken Edo. And the phone call, which, usually comes into just a general number at the FBI, went to another organized crime squad. Even that was shocking. And my supervisor at the time heard there had been a call in on Ken Edo, and went over to that supervisor's desk and said, that case belongs on my squad. That is one of our targets on the North Side. You've got to give that call in to me. My supervisor called this supervisor's bluff and got the call in sent to me or given to me. And I looked at this as, oh my God, this is a gift from heaven. Well, this is my break. Someone's calling in to talk about this guy. No one's talked about him since 1959. But
It really is,
yes, yes, except rumors, just rumors.
Yeah, and here you have somebody wanting to provide information about a guy who no one has been able to get any information on for years.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so, okay.
It's all looking up.
Yeah. So I get this information. I thought, well, I'm going out now. And I call him and say, when can you meet there? I can be there in an hour. And he says, oh, yeah, I can meet you. But he wanted to play real clever for a while and would meet me only outside of a restaurant and from his car to my car, which was really kind of stupid. And then we got to meet inside of a restaurant. And that's when I introduced him to another agent by the name of Tom Smith. He never put together that Tom Smith was my husband because he could only meet after work hours. And, my whole squad was gone. And who do I get? What other agent do I get to go along on this lead to meet my informant? Okay, I asked my husband, and will you go on this with me? And of course, he said yes, he would. So he met Tom for the first couple times. And then afterwards, I really just kind of introduced him to other agents. But really, like 6 months later, 8 months later, I got around how I paid him, which I did pay him. I wrote it up, why I should get money for last week or last month, justifying it. I would say put in for $200. They'd give me $200 in a check. I'd go to the bank, I'd cash that check, and then I'd go out and pay Frankie, who signed the receipt. Yeah, you'd do the blue slip, and then you'd have a memo attached which justified why you wanted it at $300. The next meeting I had with Frankie, I would give it to Frankie, and he'd sign a receipt for it. Then I'd turn that in.
Well, it's always interesting to understand the motivation of an informant. Was it all about the money, or was there any other reason?
No, it was all about the money in the beginning. And all we had to do was meet a couple times. And he sort of, in quotes, and I don't want to say this, but he fell in love with me. He became totally enamored with me. And I did nothing to endorse that. It's just that I was this FBI agent and he thought I was really wonderful. And on top of that, I gave him money every once in a while. And so that made it even better. And I treated him really respectfully and really with the greatest of courtesy as I could. And so that's how our relationship developed. And he and I would talk about how he could get to know Edo, how he could get to know where Edo kept the gambling records, and led to search warrant for Edo's car, the room in a hotel he used to do the tabulating for his Belita operation. And that's what gave us all the original evidence against the interstate gambling operation. Then, that was in September of 1982, and Edo was not indicted until early 1982, 83. And he was indicted, arrested, released, and his boss, Vince Solano, learned about this. Of course, it was in the newspaper. It was a very big deal. And Solano was very, very paranoid about Edo, really realizing what a stand-up, loyal guy he was, and really understanding how many years he had been, loyal to the mob by sharing all his proceeds in his gambling operations with them. So he wanted to know what Edo was going to do about this indictment, and Edo said, "I'm going to plead guilty." And Vince Solano found that this was incredulous. "Why would you plead guilty?" He said, "The most they're going to give me is 18 months in jail. I can do that standing on my head." Vince was not buying that. He says, "Once again, why aren't you fighting this?" And Joe tells me later that he could tell that Solano wasn't buying this, but to him, he told him, he says, "It's just stupid. My attorney tells me I can't win it. I can't win this case, and I'll get more of a sentence if I try to fight it out, not to mention the bill I'll have to pay my attorneys to take this case to a federal trial." And so this is in the fall, in the beginning of 1983. Vince can't tolerate this. Vince can't stand him pleading guilty to this federal gambling case, and so he gives the order to take him out.
Now, had you attempted to get him to cooperate? Obviously, Vince thinks he is going to, or that he is cooperating with you in the FBI. Had you attempted to get him to cooperate?
I had approached him on the street on two different occasions and in two different places. I had talked to him when we searched the hotel room that he used as a tabulating room. I seized his car. I tried to convince him. He said, "No, I understand what you're saying, Mrs. Smith, but I cannot cooperate. I just cannot do it." And he thought himself that he could spend 18 months in federal prison. It wouldn't be any really tough thing for him. He was a very disciplined, very loyal person. Actually, well, he knew what was the price of not being loyal, because the Chicago mob demonstrated it almost every other month by, someone shot in the head in the street or stuff in a trunk or whatever. There were lots of mob murders. So he was never going to cooperate. Vince Solano was not convinced of it. And so he sent John Cattuso and Jasper Campisi out to kill him one night in February 1983. And the setup was Vince wanted to have dinner with him. And these two guys, John Cattuso and Jasper Campisi, were going to pick him up and take him to a restaurant that the boss was going to meet him. He thought this was entirely ridiculous, but he still took a bath and put on clean underwear, a clean shirt, suit, tie, and went for his last dinner with these two guys that were going to drive him.
So he called it his last dinner. He thought that he was going to be killed?
Yes.
Wow.
He said, "I'm a betting man, and I would have bet only 10% of my odds of surviving this meeting."
But he went anyway.
He went anyway, and I asked him numerous times, "Why did you go to that meeting? You knew you dressed for your own funeral. Why did you?" And he told his wife before he left where he left his will. And he said, "I just couldn't. That's who I was. I couldn't go on and live the rest of my life without hiding. And I just couldn't escape them. I didn't think I could escape them." And so he went. And when he got in the car with these two guys, where they told him to meet him, they had him meet him in a parking lot behind a closed theater that buttressed a railroad track. And he said, as soon as they had me drive to that place, he said, "Oh boy, this is it. I'm going to get it now." And that's when John Cattuso from the back seat went boom and shot him in the head. And he felt the impact, and then boom, shot again. He felt another impact, and he thought, "Well, I'm not dying. Nothing's happening. I'm going to." Now, of course, he starts bleeding profusely. "I'm going to pretend that I'm dying." And he starts shaking all over and pretends that he's dying. He gets another shot in the head that still doesn't do anything. And he falls pretending dead on the front seat.
Now, of course, I've read your book, so I know that you were going to tell this story, but it is still amazing that somebody is shot in the head 3 times and doesn't die.
Well, it's all about ballistics, all about bullets. I listened to another podcast just recently about this from an organized crime guy who said that the rounds were poorly loaded or something. And what forensics tells me were the rounds were like old and they had started to deteriorate. And the gunpowder wasn't hitting the firing pin and hitting the explosive in the end of the bullet because it had eroded so much. So these guys had gone for this murder with ammo that was like maybe 30 years old and had been sitting in someone's basement.
So the velocity just wasn't strong enough to penetrate through the skull?
Right. And nor was the angle. The angle went around his skull 3 times. Went under his skin and out. Under his skin 3 times. He also had an unusually thick skull. And it was based in the rear, behind his ear, but quite away by his neck. And so it really wasn't fired in any really key place in the temple or in his spinal cord or column or anything like that. And so it was a real lucky thing for him.
Yeah, that's amazing. There's a similar story of organized crime guy in Philadelphia who also was, shot again, an associate. I think he might even have been a member who was shot in the head a couple of times and lived and became a cooperator. So I guess
sort of convincing, huh?
Yeah, someone's looking out for both of these guys to convince them that cooperation may be how they want to play this. Interesting.
But it's just the story is fantastic because Joe becomes one of the most remarkable witnesses because he has this almost total recall. And as to dates and times and amounts and where things took place. And he and I actually developed a year by year, month by month, day by day calendar of what he was doing with the mob, who he was meeting, where they were meeting. That with random surveillances that the FBI had done or the Chicago police had done that we had records of, we were able to match up these dates to other information that corroborates his story.
You skipped a good part though from your book that I want to make sure that you cover, because after trying to get this guy to cooperate and building this case and him telling you no, now he's shot in the head, and I guess you're the perfect way if somebody were to write this as a movie script, then you run to the hospital and you get him to cooperate. But that's not the way this happened, is it?
No, actually, to me, it's a more glamorous way. I get a call in the middle of the night or towards midnight. I was already in bed because I was in Vail skiing. Skiing is, if you're out skiing, you go to bed pretty early because it is a sport and it is pretty athletically, challenging. And I found it was pretty glamorous to be in Vail, Colorado skiing, and also disappointing. And I was very afraid that the case was going to be taken away from me and given it to some guy who was not a rookie and who had paid his time on organized crime. But this was really a wonderful supervisor that said, don't worry, when you come back from your vacation, I want you to stay in Vail. I want you to finish your vacation. When you come back, you'll have enough work, so you won't be going on vacation anytime soon. So I went back and I had the survivor, the attempted murder, there waiting for me with bandages wrapped around his head. And I had met him several times before. It was like meeting an old friend. He was just so happy to see me because I had been kind of hounding him for years before. He knew I was working a case on him. He knew somebody at the FBI had to be, and I had met him several times in attempts to flip him. And so then there entails like lots and lots, 18 months, I would say, on a regular basis, every week, every other week, maybe once a month, meeting with him over the years, debriefing him about 35 years with the mob. And I think that we had 3 large volumes of his 302s. And the information that he gave jump-started many of the old cases and started numerous new cases. So they attempted to murder him really paid off for the FBI and the United States Attorney's Office and United States citizens tremendously, because it really began the decimation of the Chicago mob.
Well, let me ask you about the Chicago Police Department, because I would imagine that they would have a unit there that would also be tasked to investigate the Chicago mob. When they find that you have this key cooperator, I mean, is there any type of competition or struggle, or they want to talk to him, they want to debrief him? Was that any type of an issue, for you?
Well, there was a commander that was by Edo's bedside when they brought him, after he stumbled from his car into a pharmacy after being shot in the head, and they bring him to a hospital, and a commander of the Chicago Police Department shows up at his bedside along with other policemen. And they want to know who shot him. And he's saying, "No, I'm property of the FBI." These are his words. "I'm property of the FBI." Kept saying that. And he said, "I only will talk to Elaine Smith." And the commander turned to someone and said, "Who the F is Elaine Smith?" And it was like, what? First of all, they want to talk to the FBI. Then they want to talk to some female FBI. What is, he was astonished. And Joe was just very strong. I mean,
why did he insist that he was the, quote unquote property of the FBI and that he only wanted to speak with you? Was that because of the time that you had put in? No. Or was he a little bit afraid of... Okay, tell us a little bit more about that.
Got that. So from the time that he picked up at the pharmacy and loaded into the back of an ambulance to go to the hospital after it's been shot in the head, the ambulance drivers take a long time in shutting the back doors. And he yelled out to them, "Close the back doors, close the back doors," because he was so afraid that some of the outfit guys would come up, realize that he wasn't dead, and finish him off in the ambulance.
Mm.
And so they did close the back doors. And then when they took him to a hospital, then he was still in danger, because now the outfit, this is really bad. This guy survived. He's gone to the hospital. Somebody go over there and do him in. And so he wanted to speak to no one. He was going to muzzle up with the Chicago police, because he knew actually one of the assistant deputies was on their payroll. He himself had paid him years before. So he knew that all the way up to assistant deputy superintendent, they were rotten, and he was never, ever going to be safe in the hands of the Chicago police.
Wow. That's fascinating and sad at the same time.
Very sad.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it worked out. It worked out for the FBI and for me, that's for sure. Because, they would have messed it up. They weren't at anywhere in their development to have had people and the ability to handle such incredible witness and take care of him as the FBI was able to.
And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, because, that's interesting too, your use of his historical data that he had. But I'd like to talk a little bit about the unbelievable part in your book where he is telling you, who shot him and what you were hoping to do with that information, and you, meaning you and the FBI. Could you tell us more about that?
So we knew as soon as we got Edo, and as soon as he told us who tried to kill him, we immediately went out to the two gunmen to convince them that Edo was alive. He's fingered them, and a new day has started, and now you should be on the FBI side, because it's going to be real scary on the other side. Neither one of them, apparently, and as everybody found out, they were really under false assumptions. They all thought they were expendable, and they had made a huge mistake. And actually, the mistake of that a mob slaying had never been solved in the history of Chicago. The mob, we had never solved a murder. The police had never solved a mob murder. The FBI had never solved a mob murder. And now we got the guy who was the recipient of the shots, and now we have you. Now either you're going to go to jail over this, or come into the fold. Come and share your stories with us, and we'll help you as much as we can. And both of them refused us. Actually, one wife of John Gattuso's wife pushed one of the agents kind of down the street, partially down the steps of their house. He was kind of arrogant and sanctimonious, and she got just kind of angry with him and pushed him halfway down the steps to their house.
Now, you took the two guys into custody, though?
No, we didn't. How could we?
Because they're being fingered for an attempted murder.
Yeah. Well, it lasted all of about arresting them, fingerprinting them, photographing, and then we had to let them go. And they immediately lawyered up. So neither one of them flipped. And so that was the end of them. And we kept going back at them time and again, 2 or 3 times. And they wouldn't hear of it.
Yeah, I guess for the FBI, there's no federal charge for an attempted murder.
There wasn't.
Yeah, did the Chicago police have enough evidence to charge them and hold them on the attempted murder state charge?
No, they really cooperated. They couldn't. No, they would have never held them. They could never have held them. They would have been released on bond. They didn't even try, and we. Other than just taking them we took them in custody for like a day or so. Then the state deferred to federal prosecution. And there they sat in limbo until we got together a grand jury and they were then indicted. And then they were arrested and released again. And then went to their demise.
Yeah, that part was unbelievable. So you had warned them that if they didn't cooperate, just the same thing that the mob had done when they assumed that Joe was cooperating would happen to them.
Yes.
And plus they had botched this murder.
Big embarrassment.
And so I take it you had warned them that they probably were going to get hit too, and they didn't believe you.
Probably. We did it 3 times, face to face. Once when we arrested them and let them go, then another time to their house, and then another time. We found them, we surveilled them and got them out on the street. It was, what good did it do the FBI to have these 2 guys in a trunk dead? It would have been much, much better for us to have flipped them and then worked them on the street, wired them up.
And that's where they ended up, in a trunk dead?
Yep, they did. Shot, garroted, stabbed, and rotting in the summer heat. So in July of 1983, they were found in the trunk of a car.
So now what do you do with Joe?
Joe is still in hiding in the city of Chicago and still being debriefed. And it was great fun to debrief him because he gave us what he thought would be the whole scene and who did it. And then we did some more work, and he gave us ideas about where it might have taken place, because this murder, there was torture involved, and it would have taken them a while to die. And what location was it safe enough to do this? And then the car was about 30 miles from where he figured, and we kind of agreed with them where they had been murdered, the basement they had been murdered, and to where the car and them in the trunk was found out in Naperville, Illinois. Somebody drove around with the 2 bodies in the trunk, dumped it in a parking lot of an apartment building in Naperville, Illinois, and they rotted there for about a week until someone started complaining about the smell from the car.
So from the very beginning of his cooperation, Joe is providing vital information.
Absolutely. We were in very close talking conversation. We talked to him almost every day and would run things by him. What do you think about that? And because we had started all of these new cases, and agents had started going out on the street and talking to people, because we had brainstormed with him as to who might be positioned enough to talk against whatever mobster they were investigating. It was a tremendous shot in the arm to the whole organized crime program of the United States Attorney, down to when most of the mob bosses were indicted and then convicted in Chicago in 1989. Family Secrets, I think, was the name of the case. And the case agent told me, he said, without Joe's original information and characterization and all of his detail, I would not have been able to make this case. And that took almost every boss of the Chicago mob down, the Family Secrets case.
In your book, you actually called Joe your one-on-one tutor.
Well, I don't remember that, but he was. I know a lot about the mob because I sat for hundreds of hours with him telling me about it.
Knowing that the mob is, taking a hit on anybody that they think is cooperating, how do you keep him safe during this time period?
Well, we had him in a location maybe for about 5 months that was at a veterans hospital. And actually, they opened up an entire floor of the hospital to him. And the FBI took it over, one part of it. And we had 24-hour 2 agents with him every day for about 5 or 6 months. The marshals picked him up for the witness security program. They picked him up with a helicopter that landed on top of the hospital. And off he went. So all of a sudden, bingo, he's gone. I know he's going to go on the witness protection program. They never tell us when they're going to take him. We never ask him that. We have nothing to do with how they pick him up and take him. But after the fact, he tells us that they came and picked him up in a helicopter on top of the hospital. It was quite a 007 kind of story.
Yeah, definitely a great movie moment.
Yes.
But
yes.
It's real.
Yes, it was real. I didn't think the marshals had it in them, but they sure did.
And now that once he's off in the witness protection, in the witness security program, are you still able to meet with him and to,
Yes.
pick his brain about different things?
Yes. Well, I met with him for like 17 years.
Oh, really? 17 years?
Yes. Yes, we met with him. I met him to give him a lump sum payment. And he had a daughter. He had a daughter that lived in Hawaii, and my husband and I would go on vacation, and we'd go to Hawaii, and we'd be able to meet Joe, and he and his daughter take them out for dinner. We talked to him. I think I talked to him every month, and he was very involved. Not involved, really. He was very anxious to hear what was going on, who was going to trial, what was happening to the trials, who was indicted, who was arrested. And so we talked about that a lot because he turned his back on the people that he had been associated with for 30-some years. He turned his back on his wife. He walked away from everything that he had. And I felt it was absolutely essential that we keep him in the fold, that we keep talking to him.
Do you think he ever had any regrets? Did he ever miss his old life?
I am sure he did. I am sure, because I had the marshals tell me on occasion. We met with Joe, and he's looking a little down and out. And I said, "What do you mean down?" And he said, "Well, his clothes are kind of ragged, and he looks a little scruffy." And that's when I started to make sure that we gave him supplemental, the FBI gave him supplemental income every month he was on Social Security. That was the only thing he was getting when he left the witness security program. So when you go on the witness security program, they don't give you a big lifestyle. You become almost broke. No family to take you in. And so it's a very, very stark reality. And it was very important for me to keep in touch with him and for the FBI to keep being his friend. We kept in touch with him every month, every other week, all for the whole time, just about that he was in the program for 17 years, because we took him away from his wife, his friends, his livelihood. We plucked him by helicopter out of everything he had known since the end of World War II. And we had to keep in touch with him. We had to keep supporting him in any way, which for a while it took the FBI putting in some subsistence for him until he could get on his feet. When you think about it, if you take a mobster into the witness security program, what do you expect them to do? They really aren't trained.
Right. They only know one way of life.
Yeah, mobstering. So unless you go back to the life of crime, what are you going to do?
Well, it's great that he was able to match up with his daughter and end his life, with family. That's wonderful.
It was wonderful. It was wonderful. I was very happy for him.
And I also wanted to mention again the film that you narrated with his son Stevie.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's again it's called Tokyo Joe: The Extraordinary Life of Ken Edo and the Chicago Outfit. How did that happen? I mean, how did you get involved in putting together this film that is an absolute memorial to Joe, to Ken Edo and his work? How did you get involved in making that?
There was Tokyo Joe was well known in Japan. He was something of a symbol to the Japanese that we've got this Japanese guy that's made it with the organized crime in Chicago, the mob, the real mafia. And he had sort of an iconic reputation. And someone in the Japanese media found out about that. And the producer of the film, Nishi Aguri, is a very well-known Japanese filmmaker. He found out about the story and he wanted to make this documentary. And that's how it came about. They searched me out and asked me if I wanted to make a movie about Ken Edo. And I said, no way. No, I'm retired. I don't want to do that. No, I'm not interested in that. And
obviously, they were able to convince you.
Yes.
And is that also at the same time that you wrote your book?
I think that I wrote my book before.
Okay. And so maybe they saw the book and said, okay, here is a person that really knows this guy and we'll have her work on it. Well, that was an absolutely fascinating case review. Is there anything that we didn't talk about the case, about your work with Joe and your time working organized crime in the Chicago division?
No.
All right. Well, let me ask you my standard question. When did you join the FBI and why did you join the FBI? And I know you have a really interesting story.
I joined the FBI in June 1979. I joined the FBI under the urging of my husband, who had been an FBI agent for 10 years. And women were just beginning to come into the field offices, and he watched them and he knew them. And he said, man, you'd really make a good FBI agent. Why don't you do that? Why don't you do that?
What were you doing at the time?
I had gotten a master's degree in education and I was teaching. I taught for 12 years and I loved teaching. What really bumped me up was I started running. And for the first time in my life, I thought that physically I might be able to do this job, the job of the FBI. Before then, I thought that, I'm a school teacher, I smoke, and I'm not fit. I never had any problem with weight. I was always thin, and therefore everybody thought I was fit, and I really was not fit at all. So I became confident physically. And then I thought, well, maybe I could do this. And so that's why I took my husband's proposal up, that why didn't I try out even?
As you're married to him in the 10 years that he was in the FBI before you became an agent, would you watch what he was doing? Were you, listen to maybe some of his success stories? And were you a little envious?
No. The only thing that would bother me was when we would be at parties and people would hear that he was an FBI agent, and then they were like all over him with questions. And I would want to say to myself, oh, don't you want to know what it's like to be teaching in the inner city? But they were always very interested, more interested to say about being an FBI agent. And I thought, well, that couldn't be bad. And then I became one, and they no longer wanted to hear about him. They always wanted to hear about my stories.
So there you go. So how long were you in the FBI in total?
22 years.
After you retired, what did you do?
You know, all federal prosecutors go to become defense attorneys. I worked for a couple of defense attorneys that I'd known as prosecutors, former federal prosecutors. And then I also was hired by the Federal Reserve Bank to do audits, to join a team of auditors on money transactions in banks that were under a cease and desist order because their money transactions looked a little suspicious. So I did that.
So I know you've been retired for a while. What are you doing now? Just enjoying your retirement?
I've moved away from Chicago, so I moved away from the attorneys that were practicing, and now we're starting to age out of the defense bar. And so I really don't do much, work. I am a CASA, which is a court-appointed guardian, special guardian for the Marion County court system, and children that are put under the guardianship of the court. I represent the court and find out whether they're being well taken care of. And I play bridge, and I see my grandchildren.
Sounds like a wonderful life. The one thing I like to do is to give my guest the last word. What would you like to say?
It was a really wonderful privilege to be an FBI agent. Just a wonderfully satisfying job in all respects. And I miss the camaraderie of it and the daily challenge of what we had to do to accomplish our goals of arresting and prosecuting, getting people that were committing fraud and murder and whatever put in jail, and protecting the United States.
And that's the end of the interview. At jerrywilliams.com, you'll find a photo of Elaine Smith and a photo of Ken Tokyo Joe Edo, including one of his skull after he had been shot 3 times. There are also links to newspaper articles about this case and a link to that documentary that Elaine narrated. And of course, there's a link to where you can purchase her book, A Gun in My Gucci. I hope you enjoyed the episode and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. If they're not sure how to listen to a podcast, have them read the post on my website, How to Listen to a Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to FBI Retired Case File Review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. I would also love it if you checked out the link for my books in your podcast app's description of this episode. My nonfiction books, FBI Myths and Misconceptions, a manual for armchair detectives, which goes through 20 cliches and misconceptions about the FBI in books, TV, and movies. And then there's the companion book, FBI Word Search Puzzles, Fun for Armchair Detectives. My FBI Philadelphia Corruption Squad crime series features flawed female FBI agent Carrie Wheeler in Pay to Play and Greedy Givers. All of my books are available wherever books are sold as ebooks, print books, and audiobooks. If you've already picked up copies of my books, please consider leaving a review. Reviews help readers find good books. Thank you for listening to the very end, and I hope you come back again for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.